Our next speaker is Dr. Mario Herrero, who's the Chief Research Scientist at the CSIRO, and his research is focusing on increasing the sustainability of food systems for the benefit of humans and ecosystems. Mario is rather active in international fora with he's on the International Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. You may also know him as one of the commissioners on the Eat Lancet Commission. There are two of them actually. There are one on obesity and one on healthy diets from sustainable food systems. Mario is also an honorary professor of agriculture and food innovation in Queensland, and you also have several other titles, but in the interest of time, maybe I just pass on the word to you to give your presentation. And just a reminder that we are trying to save some time for questions, so please keep those in mind for the discussion afterwards.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you. Yes, I got asked to talk a little bit about what's coming up, trying to give a presentation about what might be potential solutions for the future. And I can say that in many ways the future is bright. It's less negative than many of us seem to think, simply because there's such an enormous pipeline in terms of technology, in terms of initiatives towards sustainability and so on. And gladly, an industry like the beef industry can actually make the most of them. I want to start by saying that we finally achieved global convergence on the need for more sustainable food systems. And here you see three of the latest reports advocating for a profound change in our food systems. For example, the IPCC Climate Change and Land Report. This is the first time that all governments approve an IPCC report where the food system is taking a central role in both improving how we supply food to consumers and in consumers considering what they eat as something really important. There's enormous momentum, and now the key is to ensure that all that is in these reports can trickle down to the national level. The typical story and why the argument is it's actually quite convincing has been recent studies have linked changes in diet not only to the environment, which is what we had been doing for the last 15, 20 years, but also to improvements in health. So the typical story goes that if we change the way we eat, we tend to actually reduce emissions, and these emissions are mainly reduced because different foods will have different carbon footprints, and ultimately eating less greenhouse gas intensity foods will end up also releasing a lot of land from production, and this land sparing effect could actually be used to actually drive further mitigation actions. That was the story until around the 2010s. And then people started looking, well, what would happen to reductions in risk? And it has been demonstrated that type 2 diabetes, coronary mortality, cancers could also decrease if we ate a lot better. So it's quite a persuasive argument that if you can actually, through policies and through key actions, change what we eat and how we supply it, we can have very, very significant planetary and human benefits. It's quite interesting. The key is now how to do it. So on the background of this, we had reports like the Eat Lancet report, which actually demonstrated that we actually lack a lot of fish, vegetables, fruits, legumes, and proteins. Basically, everyone does so. And some people are over-consuming or under-consuming the different kinds of meats. Particularly in the OECD, there's more overconsumption of the meats. There's plenty of underconsumption and in South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. This doesn't mean that industries need to suffer, but the increases in exports from places that have very lower emissions intensities could be a real opportunity also to act in terms of mitigation. This is always in all the scenarios that we do in terms of mitigation from the livestock sector. Relocation of production to most productive areas or more efficient areas needs to be pursued. Now, if we look, it's really important to put all these numbers in relation to the dynamics of demand. A lot of people tend to do these projections, especially from FAO-Stat. By the way, there should be a 2015 in there. Sorry about that. If you examine it from the 60s, the picture would be very different. But if you look at the last 25 years, you will see that beef and lamb consumption, almost everywhere, the consumption per capita has stagnated. So the effect that you see is a population increase effect. The ones that are really growing significantly are poultry meat per capita, and to a certain extent, dairy and pork. But some of the numbers that you see in this table are quite significant. If you look at Australia in terms of the reductions in bovine meat and mutton, for example, those are in kilos. Those are actually quite big numbers. By the same token, if you look at the increases in pork production, if you look at, for example, or in pork production, look at China, 20 kilos of pork per capita in the last 25 years. That is very significant, and that would disrupt certainly what happens to feed, what happens to land use change, etc. So that table gives you a little bit of a summary of what is actually happening. But in reality, what's happening? Australia is an example. People are starting to really think that we should consume less meat just for the sake of our health. 1 in 3 consumers are already limiting meat consumption. If you look at the demographics here, in the last years, Australians defined as flexitarians has grown by 20%. 20% of meat eaters have reduced their meat consumption, me included, for example. And then you get the demographics of vegan, vegetarian, flexitarian, meat reducer, and so on. So there is certainly a trend, and there's certainly a trend also to change to other types of protein. So just to give you an idea, the plant protein market, these are still relatively small numbers. The growth rates are reasonably high, 8.3, and this is some of the last data. But in reality, this market growing from 9 to 13, 14 billion now in 2020, look, it's a drop in the sea when you compare it to the markets for animal proteins and so on. Certainly, it's an important area because we see a lot of startups, a lot of investment occurring. Look, for example, the numbers of investings, 30, 40 deals in the last year. And it's getting very fast, the production of these alternative proteins. Let me take the V2 burger. The V2 burger took 9 months to produce, while the Impossible Burger 3-4 years ago took 5 years. The V2 burger cost $1 million. It's not very much in reality. So we are against the trend where we will see this changing significantly. But at the same time, look at the meat market numbers. Huh? While we were talking about $16 billion tops, this is just red meat. Now imagine when you start really talking about the pigs and the poultry and everything. It's an important trend that we need to consider, and we need to look at what happens. But certainly the demand for meat still is here to stay still, for animal products. But of course, why do we need to think of playing, or at least try to find alternative ways of dealing with the demand? This is a graph that we did for an IPCC report in 2016, and if you look here, that red line, that's the technical potential of all supply side options for the whole livestock sector, pigs, cattle, beef, etc. 2.4 gigatons. Now, when you look at carbon prices of up to $50, the economic potential is less than half a gigaton. When you contrast that to the potential of a range of scenarios for altering what we eat in terms of meat reductions, well, you can say that there's an argument here to at least test some of these strategies. Not that I think that this is what will need to happen, but we certainly need to contract in places and really become way more efficient in the supply of animal products in others. Now, this is an important scenario because a lot of people come and tell me about the Eat Lancet, and I'm going to stand up for a second because this is, my friend Stan Wood calls this kind of graphs horrendograms, and in many ways they are, because they're quite complex. But what I want to show you here is, let me stand, I can talk loud enough. What you see here is the scenarios that were run as part of the Eat Lancet report. And what you see here is the baseline to 2010 with the different planetary boundaries that were chosen and where we are in terms of them. Green is good, red is bad. Okay? So when we look at the scenarios, we could tweak production, waste, and diet. Increasing production, trying to meet the yield gaps, reducing waste, and doing flexitarian diets or vegetarian, etc. Now, when you only do the diet, you only improve on the greenhouse gas emissions. Because you end up needing a lot more land to satisfy diets that are not as nutrient rich. So you end up needing to use a lot more land, more water, nitrogen, etc. It is only when we really start going to significant improvements in productivity and having waste and doing the dietary shifts that we really start getting into a space where we can actually look for the sustainability of the whole planetary system, which is not only greenhouse gas emissions. So this is something important to remember from the Eat Lancet report, that it's also about productivity, which has been a goal, and increases in efficiency, which have been things that we have, well, predicated for a longer time. Now, the Eat Lancet report, in the Eat Lancet report, we only examine what could happen now. But we recently did an inventory of everything that's coming up in the next, almost ready for market or under development in the next 20 years. And look at the pipeline. The pipeline is fascinating. If you look at the technologies in terms of potential, you get the circular economy, you get some of these plant-based substitutes that we've been talking about, artificial meat and fish, etc. But all these things can actually play in many ways to the advantage of many parts of the livestock sector. Take, for example, future food and feed. With the current rates of demand that we observe, in many places, we will not have the necessary feed to support the rates of growth observed. If you look at sub-Saharan Africa, if you look parts of Southeast Asia or South Asia, well, we really need to start thinking into how are we going to integrate different sources of protein, different sources of feed in general terms. I'm going to finish in a couple of minutes. Part of this is the circular economy. The circular economy for livestock is a really, really interesting proposition. Why? Well, this is a piece of work that we did with Hannah van Santen from Wageningen. And if you look at this, if you look at this circle, this is what we call the inner boundary. This inner boundary is, first, this is the consumption that you get from each of the countries in terms of protein. This inner boundary is 7 grams of protein per capita. Human needs roughly 50. Okay? 7 grams can be produced just from low opportunity grazing lands of the world. That's almost 20% of the protein requirements of a person. Now, if we manage to put waste streams into some of the feed, this would increase to 23 grams per capita. We are talking about 45, almost 50% of the protein protein produced from livestock fully decoupled from land, because this is already from leftover streams. We need to investigate this further. It's impossible that we not do anything about it. And in relation to this, well, there's plenty of things happening already. Like, for example, civil engineers are producing microbial protein from sewage plants. And they hydrolyze it, and it comes like a white powder, like casein. And this is getting into feed manufacturing processes for pigs in soybeans. We estimated with a partial equilibrium model what would happen if this really flew. Well, you end up with reductions in global cropland area if you were to replace soybean by this product of around 6%, your nitrogen losses of around 8%, and your greenhouse gas emissions by 7%. This is fascinating. This is attractive as a proposition where you can actually start using leftover streams even from other sectors. And we need to start thinking in that more transsectoral way to really incorporate true circular principles in this. And to finish, well, it will be expensive at the beginning. Some of this is really expensive. I always finish with this hard drive graph taken from a 1984 magazine. $3,000 for 10 megabytes. It used to cost. Look at where we are now. Look, for example, the lab-grown burgers from 325,000, the first ones, to around 250 to 4 now. And this is the case for many of the technologies that we're talking about. And these are opportunities that we need to invest now in order to really move them through the system and create a sustainable future. Thank you very much.